everyone. It won't be too long before you adults out there over the age of 21 will be able to buy weed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts legally. That's right. We've been talking a lot about that, and we'll continue to talk about that. Boston Magazine, Vice, Leafly, The Daily Beast, all publications that my in-studio guest has contributed for as a writer. His name is Dan McCarthy, and he'll be our guest next on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, once again brought to you by Vape Daddies, the premier retail store dedicated to vaping your favorite substance, now with 4 locations in the Boston area, in Newton, Norwood, Framingham, and Braintree. Who's your daddy? Vape Daddies, the answer. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share, and follow our podcast with episodes available on iTunes and the CLNS Media Network. And, of course, a video record of this interview will be available on the YouTube channel at CLNS Media. Dan McCarthy, it's been a lot of fun talking with you informally over the last few minutes. First time we've met. So thank you very much for coming into the studio at Little Park Media.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. So what do you think?
Where to begin?
I don't know where to begin. I will say this. Yeah. From now on, now that I have learned so much about this substance, the rules, the regulations, the history, I am no longer going to use the word marijuana.
Sure.
Because of its racist undertones, and you can now explain to our audience the history of that and how it all became about, because I know it had something to do with Mexican immigration, which, by the way, is back in the news again.
Right. Well, yeah, and while topical, pun intended.
Yes.
The history is pretty rich. And look, I don't want to hack it up and get dates wrong, but the gist of it is, marijuana wasn't just a word that was somehow associated with this plant that has been part of human history for thousands of years. But more importantly, as the march of progress steps on, there's a lot of going back through the twisted and very hypocritical attitudes this country has had at the sort of law enforcement level and also culturally against cannabis. And it starts with stuff like calling it cannabis or marijuana. Marijuana, there's various explanations of how it came to be, but the history is that there was a way to make this stuff sound bad and evil. Give it a funky, exotic name that when somebody would say, what the hell does marijuana mean? And they mean like devil's root or devil's plant or whatever it translated to, right? Cannabis, the actual plant itself, right? That's a little less, fear-inducing.
Love the botanists. Botanists, yep.
And then at the end of the day, think about it. Like it was, once you start to color with one particular pencil, and if everybody's looking through a very small keyhole, that's all that they're going to see, whatever this thing is through. And so suddenly, go back through all the Reefer Madness all the way up until the 30s when the federal government underwrote the Reefer Madness film itself.
And made the wrong drug legal and the wrong drug, the wrong drug legal, alcohol. It's poison. They made poison legal, and they banned cannabis.
It's funny, and I'm to be very clear, I'm in no way a teetotaler. I'm as much of a righteous drinker as anybody else, and in some ways, drink professionally when I'm writing about restaurants and beer and what have you. And I tell that to my girlfriend all the time, when she's like, "Really, we're gonna have a beer right now?" And I was just like, "Come on, you were the professional drinker." So, having said that, of all of my use and proselytizing for cannabis, both as a medicine and as a hell of a good way to have a good time, depending on what you want to use it for. It's good for everything from the heart-wrenching stories of preventing small 10-year-olds from having certain kinds of epileptic seizures that without this one type of compound that comes out of this plant grown organically in the sand that you simply have to pluck and press with heat, and suddenly there's this life-saving medicine, versus the cornucopia of pharmacology that's available to any 12-year-old that wants to rip down a Tide Pod or get some Sudafed off the shelf. Sure, on top of all that, there is this federally designed poison called delicious alcohol. That's why, think of everybody. I always, when I'm talking with friends of going out to eat, and I'm all about, I like clean eating, even though the industry itself is a lot of BS, but the concept of eating more organic and natural food, sure, I love it. I do it with my girlfriend, and I feel healthy, and it's great. And there has been demonstrable effects from that. Having said that, when you're out at a restaurant with somebody that's being really overly obnoxious about it, and then they're like, yeah, and then I'll have,
a Diet Coke.
No, I'll have some funky cocktail made with like marshmallow vodka And they're like, but I don't want to put chemicals in my body. What the hell do you think booze is, let alone that turpentine rancid crap? Like, of course, right? So yes, there has been this hypocritical attitude because at the end of the day, look at the accumulated known history of man. Add up all the times alcohol has fueled or directly caused some kind of calamity, and then add onto that how many people have ever died from cannabis, right? As a drug.
Right. Can you actually count that on one hand?
No, of course. It's called zero.
That's right.
Because nobody's ever died from cannabis. You can, and you can't. There's a very big misconception in cannabis between, and especially in sort of like, the sort of conservative side of the argument that just says no, the Jeff Sessions, to people all the way up the spectrum to way legal. Difference between, say, overdosing and overconsumption. Not to get morbid, the very simple fact is, you can't overdose on cannabis. You can't take in enough marijuana stuff to kill you, right? Unless you choke on the raw plant, simply because respiratory depression does not occur like it does with alcohol, with heroin, with every other drug and chemical you can think of. If you take 10 baby Tylenols, you're going under, right? And here's the other thing. Think about it in terms of how many people, great artists, normal schmoes, my family members, how many people have died as a result of alcohol, whether it's poisoning or being drunk and doing this or what have you, right?
And taking others with them.
Or the slow slag of how alcohol has destroyed many people's lives.
Right. Mickey Mantle.
Right. Because anybody. Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's like anything. In moderation, things are good. But the difference is this, and I've had this conversation heated with people that get into, like, the minute anybody that's on the sort of no side of cannabis, or they're on the iffy and they don't want to say no because they know they just don't know enough, but they definitely know, like, there's these hard lines, like, definitely don't want stoned drivers. You don't want people with that stoned going through them while they're driving. Really? To ask me how many people that I've seen, I can literally watch them popping Prozac and pills on the highway when I'm stuck in traffic coming out of the tunnel, just before exit 18 on 93. How many people are taking a shot or two or a beer just before going home, right? How many people still do road sodas? I've seen plenty of them. The bottom line is this. Anybody that sees that as some categorical imperative, all you have to do is go like, all right, how about this? I'm going to go shot for joint with you. Let's see who can drive home at the end of the night.
That's a great analogy. I like that analogy. Dan, take a deep breath.
I know.
It's a long podcast, all right?
I don't run out of fuel.
No, I can tell, and I'm afraid there's so much energy in this room right now, it could be very scary. Just a little background on who Dan McCarthy is. Yes, he's a freelance journalist, but he works for Leafly. He's contributed to Boston Magazine, the Boston Globe, Vice, and a whole bunch of other periodicals. He's also been a teacher at the now defunct Northeastern Institute of Cannabis, not anything to do with Northeastern University. Very important I say that because I have friends over there. You were referred to me by Chris Ferrone of Dig Boston. Explain what Dig Boston is.
Dig Boston is the alt weekly in Boston. As a dying breed as the industry is, it is seeing a resurgence because people are starting to try to figure out what to trust and where to get different information resources. And look, Dig Boston is a brand that's been around in Boston for 20 years. It's you think of the institutional memory of the alternative independent press in Boston. You have, of course, the Boston Phoenix, who I used to contribute to as well, was sort of the landmark. It was the village voice of Boston, if you will. It's part of that national network of alt weeklies. Now, with the Boston Phoenix gone, now the Boston Herald is pretty much, going out the door. There's very few news outlets left. Dig Boston is the only independent weekly newspaper that covers news, politics, deep investigation features, all the great arts and entertainment stuff that you usually go to an alt weekly for. But on top of that, it has cannabis coverage that has not been seen in the city and still hasn't been seen on the level that it's doing because, sure, the Globe has money and resources to go do some big profiles, but the Globe has always dragged their feet. They've always dragged cannabis through the mud. How long did it take before the Globe actually put a page one, A1 story up about the benefits of weed? If anything, it was always about some other topic mired in the greater reefer madness, right? So Dig Boston, as an alt weekly, it has the best cannabis coverage in terms of the wonkiness, the political level, covering the State House, to the different columns and newsletters it puts out through the nonprofit associated with that was started up by the crew over there. It's called the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, bingeonline.org. I contribute there as well. I'm sort of just a gun for hire, and who's ever going to string me a check to write some words down.
That's right. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Do you find that the biggest hurdle for acceptance is the fact that it's still illegal at the federal level, and they're the people that are anti-cannabis cling to that classification.
That's it. I mean, that's the last thing. Look, when I used to teach at the Cannabis Institute in Natick, I would often, give this analogy to a lot of my students. Like, the stigma is the last thing, the very, very last thing, even after it turns federally, and it will eventually become federally legal. The pendulum's swinging that way. It's a matter of time at this point. There's been a nonstop march over the past 2, 3, 4 decades, depending on how far you go back, in terms of real vocal activism. What used to be eschewed as sort of cultural hippies and, the hemp fest and look at those stoners and it's all these like red eye jokes and whatever else.
They all hated the Vietnam War. They did a pretty good job of stopping that and protesting that.
Exactly, yeah. And let alone, let's not even, we can't get into the drug war launched by
Please do not.
The
no
Nixon
politics.
Administration. Okay.
No politics.
But that's a very real part of the history.
I understand, and I brought up federal. I understand.
Right. So, but yes, the federal level, that's really it. Look, and I use even as a litmus test like my own parents, my mom, my stepdad, right? And, culturally, they're where they are. My mom, I love her to death. But, she's always sort of like, if you remember that movie Contact, right? It starts with the picture of the Earth and the camera pulls back and it's all the radio waves going into space. And it's like the 70s and then it's like the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s going way out. My mom's sort of like categorically like, an epoch behind culturally. She's not, 5 years ago, if I had, heard her call me up about something about weed, I would have fallen over with a heart attack. Like, what? You're like curious about this? She's now accepting, she's getting her head around CBD because the rollback of the stigma, the onboarding, the mainstreamization of cannabis across the board as a healing medicine or as just something to use like anything else. You are a hypocrite, pure and simple, if you are anti-cannabis but guzzle wine 6 nights a week. Are you against cannabis and you just are against any of those kinds of substances? Well, do you drink coffee? There's another substance in your body that's you're getting an actual psychoactive effect from. It's altering your mood, right? All that stuff up and down the board. Federally, that's where the majority is. It's the people that like are sort of throwing up their hands. Maybe they followed the whole conversation, what's been happening. Maybe it's some like ethereal sort of orbiting level to somebody else that's really into it. Maybe that would be me for most of my family, right? Mm-hmm. When it boils it down, usually everybody's like, oh, okay, all of those points may be true. Everything you've said may be the case. And all that stuff sounds great. It's still illegal federally. Right? When that's done, maybe I'll revisit this idea. Well, that's coming as well. But look, people that even used to use that as the line in the sand are now watching top-tier talent being pulled off from investment firms and Goldman Sachs in these spots that are being just siloed out to create a crackerjack sniper team to start landing the biggest big investments. This is a $20 billion industry that's opening up almost overnight. Imagine if the tobacco industry had been outlawed for 100 years based largely on racial stereotypes and the profit margins, and the hemp outlaw, that all started with William Randolph Hearst, right? But we can get into all that stuff after.
The hemp thing we will discuss at some point, but let's focus on this one.
But I just lost my train of thought.
No, and I'm not actually surprised by that because you are so passionate about this, and I love that. Yeah. I really do because in a lot of ways I'm looking at a younger version of myself over the years. One of the things those naysayers out there who bring up the federal classification of it, which as we know is a bit of a joke. But even those people recognize the opioid crisis in this country. And even those people, I think, are starting to realize that, maybe this drug that I used to think was a gateway drug is really an exit drug that can help the people that are on opiates and just as a personal affront, hopefully help the NFL players who have given years off their lives for our entertainment, and a lot of them have been hooked on opiates, including someone like Brett Favre.
I mean, look at, who is it, Ricky Williams? Those guys just started a whole cannabis company for ex-athletes or something?
Yeah, and good for him. And I know Eric Martin's out there, used to be with the Patriots. I mean, there's quite a few guys out there. And by the way, have you noticed that nobody mentions the NBA?
Right.
David Stern as the commissioner back in the day, I'm going to say the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird time, at the turn of the 1980s when Larry and Magic really saved that league. And I know I use a lot of sports analogies, but there's a reason why I do that.
Yeah.
They haven't been testing for marijuana because they knew their players used it.
Right.
And they know that their product relies on their players.
Like, nobody has an actual, aside from, I don't know, fundamentalists, religious zealots, who knows? At the end of the day, though there is no moral quandary in this game, you cannot have a moral-based argument on being against it. You can be morally for it. That's really the only right way to go. You can't be morally against it, because when any argument gets presented, once it's within the parameters of logic and accepting truths as they are presented to you, and not just sort of willfully choosing what you want to believe about any given point in this long stretch of an argument, right? Ultimately, when these conversations keep going back and forth, when these conversations keep going back and forth, you're going to find that it's about $1.01. Anybody at a business level, any Fortune 500 company that still won't come out in support of it or can't be affiliated, they're kind of like for it, but they're like, as a business decision, I don't know how this is going to affect my business until it's federally legal. As much as we believe in it personally, we can't do it. All of that stuff comes down to $1.01. It's how is it going to affect the bottom line? If it's a negative impact, it will not be tolerated. If eventually it becomes something that will be a positive, or just culturally it's more accepted, sure. If we're not going to lose money on this or standing in the marketplace, sure, we'll be for it, right? That hypocrisy was on display in Massachusetts, right? Right after Yes on 4 passed in November, right? The overwhelming percent, 53% or whatever it was, Massachusetts
54%.
voters, 54%.
Yep.
Voted in favor of legalization of adult use recreational cannabis.
Not an overwhelming majority.
Not overwhelming, but
okay.
But it passed.
Okay,
it passed.
I have friends, by the way, that had medical cards.
Yeah.
That voted against it. Because
some people were against the rec.
Because they said, "Wait, I'm in the club. What do I need to let everybody else in?"
Well, there's even more to that, and that's actually a topic that's being really plumbed right now, and there's a lot of fervor over it. It's these patients being like, "Okay, rec is coming." But just make sure
I get mine.
Well, it's basically like I have a medical card for a reason. So the worst situation, and this is happening in early rollout states, because again, perfection is the enemy of progress. Things are getting figured out. However, for medical patients, they want to make sure that their stock, the things they come to get there are fine, and they're not just flying out the door because of rec. Now, there's a lot of controversy going on in how that's balancing out. Some places opened up with the idea of when and if rec is passed, then sure, they'll be able to do both, and they'll have to keep 60% of their stock specifically for medical or what have you. Then you get stuff like Patriot Care in downtown Boston, the first inner city dispensary to open up.
I knew you were going to bring these guys up.
I mean, to put it short, it was a bait and switch for the most part. This company comes out of nowhere from the mountain state in Colorado, get all this done. They have all the neighborhood meetings. They do a song and a dance for the neighborhood. Everybody involved. They said, we will not do rec. Rec passes. Oh, there's law and money to be made. Sorry, we're going to do rec now.
Changed our mind.
Right.
Bill Parcells used to say that. I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah. I believe that before I change my belief.
And I think the current bill changed his mind, too. We can get into that another time. Let's go back to the commission just for a second.
Yeah.
They were under the gun. They had a deadline to reach for the rules and regulations regarding the adult use. One of the things that they definitely put into place was protecting the percentage for the medical patients.
Yeah.
35%, 30%. It was in that range. Let's say between 30 and 35. It's one of the best things I think that they did. And they have been not vilified, but then held out a little bit but they had a very tough job to do.
They did have a tough job, and the commission has made really great strides. There's been plenty of pitfalls. There's been plenty of back and forth, but protecting patients, that's very important. That should be paramount to getting this full industry off the ground and off the right way. What's holding that up, or when that sort of crossover starts to influence one and the other, that's where a lot of the shenanigans can come into. However, on top of protecting patients, look, that bill also did a lot of work, and there was a lot of fighting at the State House to make sure that the equity provisions were kept in there, to make sure that inner city people from communities of color, anybody that has a past of nonviolent trafficking in the very thing that's about to be legal, if it's trafficking a small amount, if somebody was caught with a small amount, and let's not even get into gender and racial bias in terms of law enforcement, and if like, some white kid was caught with a bag of weed and he got a slap on the wrist, some other kid is probably could be doing 10 years for it, being fell into the system. Making sure those people that have gone away or done some had some kind of legal ramifications for getting into the industry just before the rest of the country caught up, made sure the back and forth in the debates and a lot of the work with the commission was to make sure in that bill were those provisions that signaled out to make sure people got into this at an equal playing field. Not, okay, we're just like who's going to have the dispensaries? Well, can individual people come in, or does it have to be this sort of big cannabis that walks in, right? Who's going to be those first ones that get off the ground? If it's up to certain politicos, I won't mention too much right here, but it would be like, you know what? Let's let the Starbucks and McDonald's come into town, give it a year, right? And then once we'll just open the doors up to mom and pop shops, because never in the history of business or earth has things with lots of money, influence, power, and political influence come in and then let the little guy come. Come get your fair seat at the table. Of course not. Listen, this kind of stuff is going to happen, right? Big cannabis coming in. There's a lot of stuff at the top, a lot of stuff at the bottom to consider. It's a massive industry. It's just getting off the ground. We talk all the time, being members of the media, like, oh my God, where is media right now? We're 20 years into the invention of the internet, and all advertising's gone, and newspapers are folding, and everything, and this consolidation and that Sinclair nightmare, right?
We just talked about that on Behind the Media.
Don't get me started.
No, you and me both.
Oh my God! But like, we're in this age, like, where everybody feels like maybe we're at the cliff right now with media. Maybe we're about to figure it out, and that's kind of like the fun in media right now. It's like the worst time to get involved and the best time. Nobody has it figured out.
Some subscriptions are up at the Times and the Post, and entries into broadcast journalism programs are seeing a spike as well.
Yeah.
So what's that say? That says people are tired of, if it's fake, why can't I get in and do it right?
Right. And my larger point is just that the
little guy.
Yeah, look at the fact that the cannabis industry is just getting off the ground. There's going to be a lot of stuff to work out. But the important part is getting certain aspects of the language, right? Mm-hmm. Certain aspects of what's going to be the sort of defining parameters of how this industry is going to get off the ground. Of course, there's a lot of wrong that still could be, made right. That's going to take time. It's making sure that the precedents that are being set right now, either legally or sort of with the unofficial but official way, it's making sure those precedents aren't going to be set up in such a way that this suddenly becomes an industry for the few instead of the many, which it is right now in theory and should be, and could even get better. But the idea wouldn't be to take less power away from people being able to enter this industry and starting a new small business, starting a small product manufacturer, little stuff. Think of all the things that already have been being done on the black market for years. They're suddenly going to be open overnight. I've done stories in Boston of guys that have been running successful underground gourmet multi-course cannabis dose dinners at restaurants.
I've read about them, actually.
I've read that.
Did you write that?
Did you write that? I wrote that.
I knew I read that somewhere.
and these are things that sell out. They're $100, $200 a ticket, and
right.
Sell out like a room of 30, 40 people. Right? This is a business that is getting off the ground,
and it's not going away.
No, in no way is it going away. In no way is it.
So
going away.
Is the law? And I recognize what the commission did of trying to protect the both the people who have paid their debt to society in jail and are now getting back or have been out for a while.
Sure,
it's still a monumental task to get the license, to file the right legal, there's legal ramifications. What is the state doing anything to, like, here's the how-to kit to start your own small business in cannabis?
Right.
I mean, that to me would help those guys.
Those are coming.
Those
are coming. And there's a bunch of different fronts that you're going to start to find those. There might be some officially getting put out by the commission. I just had coffee this week with Shailene Title from the commission. Mm-hmm. I know her well. She's been a great advocate for making sure there's a lot of equity in the laws being rewritten, making sure there's sides are being heard, but the right things are moving forward. I applaud her for that. But those kinds of roadmaps, they're coming out in different ways. For a long time, it's really just been this sort of esoteric national scope. This thing of like, here's how the industry works. Like, maybe somebody would know that Ole Miss has the only federally backed cannabis farm that the federal government uses for any test. And don't forget, all drug testing and understanding what cannabis does to the body, that was all halted for decades, right? That goes not only like, say, cannabis. We're talking psychotropes, what LSD was doing to get people off alcoholism. The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous actually said that LSD microdosing of psilocybin was a key proponent of him figuring out how to kick alcoholism. There was tests being done that basically got halted, right? That entire actual official medical inquiry into the benefits of some of these drugs. In this case, what's the resurgence is cannabis. There's a paper in Oregon called, I think, the Oregon Cannabis Connection. It's a free newspaper, and it has in every issue a breakdown of studies being launched, where they're being launched, what they're going to be studying, what the benefits are, when it's going to be completed, what the actual summation of these studies. So you can be like, look, I have a kid with epilepsy. I just saw that the University of Connecticut is launching a study on the benefits of high concentrate CBD for reducing X kind of epilepsy. Like, the study will be completed next fall. I'll keep an eye on that, because when I go before my local counselors and talk about the benefits of this medicine, I want to bring up the most recent research, right? But all of that's fairly new, these studies coming back up, right?
And now, science and research is going to drive the movement.
Yes, very much so. Think about this, right? Only in the 90s. Did we really come to grips and figure out that there was this thing called the endocannabinoid system? Your body's internal receptors that you are born with that are built to receive one thing. Compounds and molecules from the cannabis plant, essentially cannabinoids, right?
Now, when you talk to the local officials and explain the endocannabinoid system to them, do they go, "Oh, you're crazy. That's not true. It's not in my body."
It's never been that. It's never been that sort of cartoonish. But I have had enough conversations with people where I've you all of a sudden will lose them right after presenting that information.
Right.
Like, it's almost like it didn't hit.
They can't believe it.
What was it just this week? There was just a new organ, like massive body organ was just discovered like this week. There was invidious. It starts with an I. I forget what it is.
I bet Google knows, and we
yeah,
can't get
somebody
to
look
Google
it up.
right
But it
right.
literally just came out in the last week or so. And I mean, it's legit. Like, it's like just under the skin. I forget what it is, but it's this whole other organ that we've never identified. Right? Think of the longevity of the history of medicine.
Right.
Not American medicine.
Right.
And just in the 90s, right during the rise of NSYNC, did we discover this endocannabinoid system. Now, take that. You know what I mean?
I just got that.
You know,
I did meet Justin Timberlake at Team Harmony. We were talking about Team Harmony and Lenny Zakem.
Oh yeah. What was he doing? A little thing.
He talked to the kids.
Did he?
Yeah.
He's a great guy, that Justin Timberlake.
Sorry, keep going. He was 19 when I met him.
Oh really?
So he was kind of dated myself.
That was before he. That was before he brought sexy back. Okay, I don't know how to reference Justin Timberlake.
All right, so.
But in any case, so the fact that there is this endocannabinoid system, right, and all these discoveries are popping through every day. Subscribe to national feeds that are coming from Scientific American, these actual respected research journals. Like, there is stuff constantly pouring out that the community is digesting and giving it context.
So I've talked to a lot of people over the last 3 weeks. I've had kind of a crash course in cannabis and all the different ancillary businesses and things in this. And one of the things that I found out was that my people's state of Israel is involved. They're doing more scientific research in Israel than any other country in the world for cannabis.
Oh, absolutely. They're the only ones that fully are not only behind it, they are the world's leader in basically advanced tech-based breakthroughs for cannabis delivery systems. I did a story for Leafly about a year or two ago, right? And it was on one of the more advanced precision medical grade, right? Precision dosed, right? Medical cannabis inhalers that was being developed by this company, Seek International, based in Israel. Now, Seek made some headlines in the burbling press some time before that because it was rumored, and R.J. Reynolds did not confirm it, but it was rumored that they got a huge influx of cash for this medical inhaler from a big tobacco company. Now, for years, Big Tobacco, this isn't conspiratorial tin hat stuff, for years, Big Tobacco just had one thing to say about cannabis: We're not involved. We have no interest in it. Like, no, yeah, kind of like the way
it's easy to stick your head in the sand. Actually,
yeah, kind of like the way
look the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like the way like elite mainstream legacy press in Boston like overlooks the independent press. Like, what? Oh, that thing? Yeah, I've heard about it, but even though they've known about it for years, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and think about it. Again, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff. There was documents going back to 1975 that were declassified thanks to the Freedom of Information Act and journalists using FOIA requests that basically got something like 10 million documents of the tobacco industry's previously classified internal memos and documents going back to 1972 or 5. It was somewhere right around there. And you can get them. They're available online at the University of California. I think, or maybe it's Santa Cruz. I can find it. But you can look these all up. You've got documents in 1972 with the heads of these boards of big tobacco. Quite literally in 1972 saying this thing's probably going to be legal in 5 years. We need to figure out how to get into the market, to diversify, make marijuana cigarettes, all these other things. So on one end, they've had enough money for years to help supply and demonize the rise of legalization of cannabis. But the whole time, they've been talking about it for years, right? So now it's like they're quietly, obviously moving. Of course, they're already in cannabis. They have to be, right? They know they're a dying breed. I mean, I smoke cigarettes, unfortunately, but more and more and more, like, that pendulum's slowly swinging as well. Of course, they want a piece of that pie. They didn't confirm nor deny it, but I wrote about that company in Israel that got a huge cash infusion from them. Now, on top of that, you've got Israel that is a huge funder of cannabis medical research. They're actually getting into it because, maybe Netanyahu just sees the long game. This is going to be the global green rush. And not just because it's a cash cow, which it is and it's going to be. Of course.
It's a very complex plant.
Look at this, right?
It's a ridiculously, well, it's great. We're saying, look at this. And
I guess I'm talking
No, that's all right. We do have video, as you know.
Okay.
This is for our YouTube fans.
Yeah. So this is something, speaking of Dig Boston, the Boston Institute of Nonprofit Journalism, you asked, like, are there these things like a starter kit, like how to get into this part of the industry, how to do this.
Right.
Now, there's tons of great media for I'm actually working with another a cannabis publication based in Denver. It's got a national reach. It's called Sensi, SENSI. I'm doing some of their Boston localized content for this new print publication. There's all this media that's coming out, but stuff like you're talking about it. In terms of those like sort of package bundles of like how to get into the industry, or how to do this, how to do that. Right. There's great resources. There's no shortage of news resources, of free ones. However, for locally, something like Dig Boston is putting out a home grow guide. It's going to be a special insert.
Makes sense.
They're going to do a recreational cannabis roadmap once it opens up. A one-stop shop. How to know what the hell's going on, where everything is, right? And you're already finding there's other companies out there locally that are producing these sort of local entrepreneurs that have gotten this far in the business. And we're talking owners of small shops like Kush Groove and Mission Hill. Look at, Chanel Lindsay, advisory board person of Arden Technologies and the decarboxylation
which, by the way,
she works.
That word.
Decarboxylation?
Define.
Decarboxylation. It's the easiest.
But this is great. But I'm having a blast. Define that word.
Yeah, decarboxylation. I
don't have to pronounce it either. I just need to ask the question.
Decarboxylation. Yeah, I won't get into the science
100.
of it.
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
For 100, Alex.
That's right.
All it is it's the process of when you take cannabis.
The flower
itself, or whatever you're getting that has the compounds in it. A lot of compounds come out of cannabis. CBD, THC, all kinds, right? Yep. So THC is the stuff that makes you high, makes you
psychoactive.
It's psychoactive.
I like that word.
It's the stuff that actually, it's what gives you that sort of the head
buzz
feel. Now, CBD, on the other hand, is another compound. It's like stoned without the stoned. It's just, imagine it like the greatest pain reliever ever.
Right.
That's
it's an anti-inflammatory. I use it. I do use it every day.
Antioxidant. It's great as a topical. It's great as an oil. Up and down the board, right? Decarboxylation. When you're having the actual cannabis plant, you're having like the actual buds of the flower, the weed itself, if you will, right? When you take weed, like if you ate like raw cannabis flower, I guess it's kind of good for you. It's a green leafy plant, right? But you don't get stoned off it, like, because in order for the molecules, right? THC itself, for that to be activated, and that's the key word, to activate the plant, it has to be heated to whatever it is, 200 and something degrees, right? That's why when you have a vaporizer that is flower-based versus an oil, in order for that THC to activate in that raw plant, all you're doing in that case is you're heating up a plant. You've seen plant, an actual leaf that is dried. All you're doing is heating it up to just before the flash point. So what you're taking in is not burning organic plant matter, like when you smoke a cigarette or smoke a joint with weed or whatever. All you're taking in is the activated loose aerosol molecules and compounds from the plant, and that's it. When you're done vaping loose leaf, it's a little pile of dry brown leaves like anything else, right? And that's why
I threw some out last night.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why a lot of people really some people prefer vaping, oil-based vape. Some people prefer flower. I'm just a regular flower head. I've got a regimented intake level through the day. Sometimes I do edibles. I make my own tincture sometimes at the house, and I'll have that for a while. It depends. But, as me and a lot of friends always joke about, like, there's all these great new delivery methods, edibles, oils, everything else like that. For people that have been part of the cannabis community for a long time, and people like myself and many others who use it all through the day in place of a variety of other pharmaceuticals, doctor prescribed or over the counter stuff that I could get that I need for different things. Right. I haven't taken an Advil in a year and a half. Right. And I think I did once when I got a tooth pulled. I had a root canal or something. Right. When I have a headache, I know I have a topical that I rub on my temples and the 11s on the back of your head, unless it's a caffeine headache. I just haven't had coffee. Nothing solves that but water and coffee.
Because caffeine is a drug.
Because caffeine is a federally regulated, studied, and deployed drug that is to the benefit of millions of people and is a major cash crop and is the GDP of certain geographic regions.
And it's more addictive than cannabis.
It's more addictive, and the jury's not even out yet. One day it's great for you, and another day it causes cancer. Like it's like nobody has any idea.
Recently,
you know what I'm saying? Like one day it's like, do this and don't crack your knuckles, you live to 100. Right. Have a cup of espresso once a week and you're dead. Like you never know with that.
Great stuff. Dan McCarthy, you've been just terrific. We're not saying goodbye because I still have 5 or 6 more things to go. But you are listening to In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, and now joined by Dan McCarthy, a Leafly correspondent. And if you don't know about Leafly, I, too, have found more information about cannabis from that site than any other site that I found on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, on the national level, they are that resource. They're sort of a combination of a news feed, organic content that's either regionally focused and nationally applicable, right down to, I mean,
the Bud Boys. Come on, the Bud Boys,
all that stuff. I mean, just look at it as like the Yelp of weed. And sometimes, I'll tell you what, when I get a new strain, right, and like I said, I'm a flower head, so when I get a strain from where I procure it from, I'll look up what this strain is. I'll look at the phenotypes. I'll look at the terpenes. I'll look at what the flavor profile is. You can go on and look at all the user reviews. And they're pretty funny, and sometimes they can vary widely, but you find a common denominator. If something is listed like a heavy, really strong sativa like Moose and Lobster or something, or Durban Poison, you can go down the cornucopia of the names.
Blue.
I mean, yeah, it's like, there's that great scene in that stupid movie Ted where they kind of make fun of how all the strains are named. He's like, I got something called This Is Permanent. Right. Or something like that. But when I get a new strain, I go on Leafly. I look it right up. And if I see, because I know how cannabis affects me, right? And I'm not sitting here to, bring you to the church of cannabis. But look, I'm a 41-year-old guy. I work from home. I work 7 days a week. I'm a freelancer. I keep weird hours. Sometimes it's feast or famine, both in work output and income coming in, right? And I've found a way to use cannabis to basically, as you can tell, I'm manic and I've got ADD. I've been prescribed pharmaceutical drugs. I don't like ingesting pills. They just don't jive with me, right? And furthermore, once I slowly started to use cannabis, not just as something I'm at a party and on somebody's deck to pass around a joint, or it being in college and taking bong rips with my buddies, like a good, red-blooded American kid did coming from southern New Hampshire.
I never inhaled, Dan.
Yeah, I have an exhale.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I've figured out how it works. I'm very acquainted and intimate with my intake levels. I know,
and you know how it affects you, which is so important because it affects everybody differently. Therein lies the challenge.
Yes,
to many of the dispensaries that are out there now, working as patient advocates. Right. They've had maybe 4 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, whatever it is, and now they're dispensing medicinal and medical information back to people. It takes time. You have to kind of be a guinea pig for yourself.
And the good news is this, somebody might hear like, oh my God, so there's, if I try this, like, what if I do it and I freak out and shave my head and jump out the window, and all this old sort of cultural stigma and junk science comes floating back into people worried. The worst thing that's going to happen, right, is really that you just find out that didn't work for you. Whether that strain didn't work, that method of intake, that level of concentration, that level of whatever it is, THC, CBD, whatever. you know, as long as you go into it thinking about it like any other thing. If it's been 10 years since you've had a glass of really nice scotch or whiskey, and you remember what it tastes like, and you remember how you get on scotch, but maybe you don't. But it's like, you know, this is the thing, and you just gas down 3 glasses, and you're a lunatic afterwards. Let's say you're one of those people. It's no different. Like, cannabis is like nothing else. It's like everything else. It's just a plant. It's a plant that has properties that affects you in different ways. But the beauty of this plant, first of all, is that, you know, this is something that has been proven to be and continues to be a life-saving plant, right? You talked earlier about
positive stories,
about people getting off opioids. The fact at the national federal level that we have an attorney general, Jeff Sessions, who is actively trying to demonize and do what he's doing to stop weed at every level and has long been an opponent of weed. And you don't need me to tell you about that. There's plenty of media out there that has video clips of all that. The fact that this is happening at a time when the opioid crisis is as bad as it is and has been fueled by everything from political and financial malfeasance to the return of soldiers fighting in these wars. I would implore anybody that doesn't believe this is a life-saving medicine, come with me when I go to these meetings, right? Come with me when I sit down for stories and go to things like the New England Veterans Alliance, or talk with people like Stephen Mandilli, this decorated and injured military vet who was at every one of the sort of state house things. He's and comes in with his beautiful Great Dane, who's his service dog. He's a military vet that, like many military vets I know, didn't even know they had a problem with PTSD till they found a way out of it. And a lot of them did it at first with opioids because that's what the VA prescribes. Right. When in doubt, go opioids. Look at Bob Lobel. We've brought him up. When I did the cover feature for him, that first story in Dig Boston, the first time Bob Lobel, who was a decorated and really well-known sports
Massachusetts broadcast sportscaster Hall of Fame
legend,
and a friend of mine that I've known since 1978, and someone I actually was Bob Lobel when I first went on the air because I looked up to him and I imitated his style,
right? As
a matter-of-fact style.
Right.
By the way, I've told Bob this many times.
Yeah.
And anyway, but yeah, he has spinal stenosis. He could barely walk if he's even doing that now. I saw him in a wheelchair.
He's in a wheelchair and
74 years old, by the way.
And he's a late in life cannabis sort of come to Jesus moment. Because why? He had a body suddenly racked with pain. This is a guy who was a spry sportscaster for years. Didn't smoke, didn't drink. You know, he didn't smoke, right?
Right.
Okay. Well,
let's just say he had a bad break late in life that caused him a lot of pain.
Right.
And he's now found an answer.
Exactly.
Okay.
And when I did the story for Dig Boston with him a couple years ago, it was right after the first cannabis convention in town. And that was really kind of a significant moment. We put him on the cover. Look, this is a guy, he even said, you know, I came from sort of the post-boomer generation. He's like, I wasn't with like the hippies of the 60s. I was. Yeah. And he said, you know, I came from this thing where I didn't really have a bone to pick with weed. It just, cannabis just wasn't for me. And he even said the first time he went in to have a consultation with his doctor that got him into cannabis, you know, he walked into the Cannabis Institute in Natick and, you know, kind of joked. He had all this sort of Cheech and Chong visions in his head, like everybody does when they're sort of outside the industry. But he walked into this professional educational environment. No cannabis was allowed on campus itself. And he started to get into it. And he said in that piece, he's like, look, all of a sudden, you know, after he figured out what he wanted, he told a great story about getting a really heavy dosage in a brownie from his daughter. And he took the whole thing, and it was he got in his car and drove away and turned right around and went home and was like, whoa, this is too much.
Right.
But he figured out how this plant and this long prohibited substance, whose prohibition is fully rooted in racism, greed, those are 1 and 2 basically.
Those are two pretty big
and the
ones.
fact that other industries that later established their foothold, let alone getting into the hypocrisy of prohibition and the Volstead Act and everything that cannabis has sort of, you know, proved to be over time. The actual hurdles, right, are going to be faced when anybody is approaching this industry with anything other than an open mind. You really kind of need that right now. And Bob was a great example of that. He even, you know, he cracked jokes. He was like, look, you know, when I first started getting it prescribed, they're like, he's like, listen, I don't smoke, so I don't like to smoke. Right. They're like, why don't you try a vaporizer? He's like, I didn't mind it, but my wife didn't like the residual smell or the residual vapor. Right. He got into gummies. He, you know, found Jolly Ranchers or whatever these things are, and he figured, okay, this was good for him. He got his levels right. And who knows where he's at now. But he basically said in a condensed way, this gave me a quality of life back. I can now at least pick up my grandkids. And this was a couple years ago. You know, he said at the time, you know, he had the sort of the arm walkers, but he said it all of a sudden he could, like, you know, he had more mobility, more flexibility. He slept better. He lost more anxiety. Like, he suddenly saw the actual, just the pure body benefits of having a better quality of life by using something that's all natural and organic, in the same way that people go to Whole Foods and get matcha tea and drink that down. You know, think about the whole kombucha craze. You know that kombucha tea?
Yes.
You know, everybody's like, oh, it's this raw, purely organic. It's this wonderful thing, and it gives you this head rush because it's all the probiotics, like, you know, putting the good fairies in your body or whatever the hell they say it is. It's just been shown the buzz you get from kombucha is basically the raw fermented alcohol being formed, right? At this low level the kombucha is. Other than that, it's just a sugary drink.
Right.
Okay.
You know what? You're making so many great points about everything. We're talking about Bob Lobel. We're talking about the acceptance of cannabis after so many years. There's so much to learn. Even someone who has used it for 30, 40 years still... you scratch the surface. I mean, the New England Cannabis Convention was so eye-opening for me.
Was that your first?
It was my first.
Okay.
And 15,000 people, 250 vendors. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know where to go, what to do. And there were so many
when
things
you walked in and saw those like, was it suddenly like, I completely misunderstood what this, or like...
No, I knew. I mean, I've been...
But was it just like, it was so professional and...
It was just... I'm from Massachusetts. It's in my hometown. It's
a head trip.
It was surreal. It really was a religious experience.
Yeah.
You've got to hear the interview I did with Lenny Sakam's brother, because I was so excited to see him and meet him just by chance. And I said, look, you know, your brother probably put us together for a reason, right? And he is involved with a business association as a consultant in Manhattan. He's been in it for 5 years, since I think Colorado or Washington State got involved. And now he is going to kind of drive the charge in New Jersey, which is where he lives. And as you know, New Jersey has finally come around with a new governor that likes it and is embracing it.
We won't mention...
Nope. We don't mention that. We don't mention those names. I want to get back to education and product. There are different institutes out there. Tomorrow I'm visiting the Grassroots Institute. They do an 8-week course, and they constantly fill it out because people want more education. There is so much to learn about this plant.
You know what the best way to learn?
Try it.
That too, sure.
Okay.
Yes, of course. Oh yeah, I will always advocate for usage and experimentation. But the best way to learn is not only obviously like
Leafly does a great
different
job.
Things. Like, just read.
Right.
I tell everybody, look,
Leafly's a great source.
Yeah, all you got to do for all the different crap that everybody shares on social media, everything from goofy memes to articles that they have a strong feeling for or against, to some piece of content that simply by sharing it, people now tacitly understand the sort of unspoken text and meter of social media. By sharing this, I endorse this, therefore it is a reflection of me, right? I tell people, just and somewhere along the way, look up something good on cannabis. If you learn something from it, if it changed your mind in a positive way, share that. The more people, that's why Bob Lobel was so revolutionary. He's like the first face that was coming on the East Coast that was recognizable, that was so for cannabis.
Certainly in Massachusetts. His Q factor is pretty large.
Right.
It really is. People know the name. They may not recognize the face and all that. And a lot of people still haven't seen him walk or try to walk in the last 10 years. I mean, it's serious. He's got a great one.
If you really want to, like, again, the ones you mentioned, there's a bunch of different educational stuff popping up. Keep your ears peeled to all these different public meetings. You can use social media to find out where these meetups are.
Yeah, go to a public meeting and just listen.
Yeah. Just hear what people have to say, and you really want to hear what this plant does to you. Go to any public meeting or something that has veterans coming in to talk about what cannabis has done to their life and to get them off opioids. And some of them have said, I didn't realize that cannabis was a solution to a problem I didn't know I had till I had the gun in my mouth. That's the level that cannabis is saving lives.
Whoa.
That's a real quote from a real vet.
Look there, it's believable. Okay, what's unbelievable is that it's here to stay, which I love to talk about.
Right.
Lastly,
yes,
the hemp industry. First, this is great because it's like I have a Google on demand here. The difference between cannabis and hemp. Explain.
Oh man, I can't do that in a good.
It's very complicated.
Look, so hemp is, think of hemp like this untapped resource that could be everything from paper to house materials that advances in 3D technology, people are 3D printing entire houses made out of hemp for fractions of the cost. Go on social media. There's a zillion of these different inspirational videos of some carpenter who 20 years ago realized he was using too much plastic and not enough sustainable woods and methods. And I mean, I'm not a carpenter. I don't know how they do it. But whatever he was doing, he realized hemp was an untapped resource. And he started personally using hemp in different ways. And now, fast forward years later, here's a guy who's building houses for the homeless and for the low-income families out of hemp that's strong, and it can even be used in areas that have been ravaged by climate change, right? And he's showing how this is an industrial product, right? I mean, you know, hemp itself, if you're using the stock of the plant and you're not going to break off a chunk of hemp and smoke it. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work, right?
Yeah. So, but bottom line is this: hemp is a very profitable,
another cottage industry.
Amazing cottage industry. It's an amazing plant with an amazing array of uses. And the only reason it remains illegal still goes all the way back to William Randolph Hearst and the battles over the newspaper industry and he owned the paper mills.
Right.
He didn't want this other thing coming along that you can make newspaper with cheaper and better. Right? No, so as it relates to the Commonwealth, I think it's important to say.
Yes.
There's a lot of great activism for hemp as an agro culture, right? As something to make a dollar on in this blossoming industry in Massachusetts. And to my knowledge, and I think there's an article about this on Dig Boston a couple weeks ago, you know, one of the big things standing in the way of Massachusetts farmers who are openly pleading with the government, you let me grow this crop that is durable, we can grow it professionally and correctly here, and it can be a great new revenue generator for the farming industry and for the small farms that Massachusetts loves to hype at all of its different organic farm festivals and come here and farm to table this, right? If you're going to really protect the farmers, let them make a living. If they can grow a tomato, let them grow something like hemp. And from what I understand, there's bills on the desk at the State House. One of the biggest people standing in the way is the governor, without getting too political, whether it's an issue that he doesn't want to address or whether there's interest saying don't address it. At the end of the day, when people start looking at what the benefit of hemp is, let alone the macro conversation of the federal legalization of weed and taking this beneficial plant off the actual classification schedule that is up there with heroin, methamphetamine. But the World Health Organization just announced today that the actual federal government just announced today that, let me find my phone, that they're open. They want to hear from people that know why it should be declassified. That was just today.
That's great. And there was also a brand new study about opioids that came out over the last couple of days about how to exit from them using cannabis.
I say it all the time. Cannabis is an exit drug. You talk to any vet that's been using cannabis to get off opioids. And look, you know, while I despise the industry itself, I despise the family who gave birth to Oxy and the opioid epidemic. I despise any politico that has had a hand in loosening the laws. If you watch any of the million documentaries available on Netflix and all these free streaming services, all you have to do is watch one of them and watch the ways in which this industry pushed Oxy and these drugs onto the market, saying that it's actually less addictive. It gave birth to the epidemic we have now, right? So on top of that macro conversation, right? What we just mentioned about one of the biggest things standing in the way of federal legalization, besides the ignominious little gnome that is Jeff Sessions, is the fact that it remains a Schedule I drug, right?
Which is crazy.
Which is ridiculous. But just today, the Federal Register actually announced an international drug scheduling convention on psychotropic substances and looking specifically at certain psychotropic narcotics. So specifically, they want to know, if we're going to declassify weed, what does that mean? Why are we doing it? Like, we want to get everybody's voice.
They want to look at the science and the research because that's all they know.
And they're going to get a lot of different commentary from, say, you know, lobbyists that are saying, here's why you should loosen this up, because there's a lot of money to be made. That's more on the political side. But the World Health Organization's Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, I'm reading this from Forbes today, the WHO's Expert Committee on Drug Dependence is meeting in June to discuss marijuana's classification and will then make pre-review recommendations to the UN Secretary General about conducting a more in-depth analysis. Following that, depending on the findings, cannabis could be rescheduled internationally. If it's rescheduled internationally, that'd be the overnight birth of a global industry that did not exist legally a night before. If it really gets internationally legalized. Now, there's a bunch of different things. Like that's way cart before the horse.
Right.
That's cart.
But scientists with medical background and all that, if you appeal to them in the language that they're used to, and there's so much research now that will support this.
Yeah.
How are they going to rule against it? I can't. I'm trying to figure out how are they going to screw this up?
You hit it right on the head. Yeah, you hit it on the head. Like it's literally ours as, I don't know, as a country, as a culture, as a species. It's ours to lose.
Right.
Right. And this just said it. Last year, that same body pre-reviewed CBD. Right. Mm-hmm. That was last year. A non-psychoactive cannabis compound we've been talking about. I'm reading again from this. Found to have medical benefits. Now, not used to be rumored to have. Now there's enough studies where the World Health Organization is saying, okay, this does have it. They still haven't come to grips on cannabis yet. Right. But it's saying the substance, which is not currently listed under international schedules but is considered Schedule 1 in the U.S., has been demonstrated as an effective treatment of epilepsy in several clinical trials and is, quote, generally well tolerated with a good safety profile, the World Health Organization pre-review found. That is really careful Politico world speak for. We found a lot of trials. Like there's a mounting of evidence.
It's hundreds,
right? Yeah,
thousands.
Not 3 articles they source on Google or their cousin shared with them on Twitter. Right? Like if they say there's been several, because there's tons of information out there, tons of research. But until it gets federally declassified, there's always going to be that sort of last little level of anybody being like, all those benefits sound great. This all sounds great. Sure. I just can't get over the stigma, but I don't have to get over that stigma until it's federally legal.
Or internationally approved.
Which
will be, a happy day. Maybe it'll happen on 420 in 2019 or something.
I'll tell you
like
what, the day I can start, taking a jaunt to go see my buddy overseas or just fly around the country with a bag of stinky weed like I got anything else, like a bottle of wine coming back from Italy.
That's right.
That's going to be a great day.
And Daron Harmon will be happy. Anyway, I got to thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Wealth of education and knowledge now. Your passion for this subject is unprecedented. I love that. I love that about that. I got to give Chris Ferrone credit from Dig Boston again for recommending you as the media writer, the best media writer. Weed writer. He did it again. The best weed writer in media.
Love it.
How's that? Is that better?
That's an accolade.
Maybe I can even edit that for the final. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on In the Weeds. That's right. And once again, In the Weeds is brought to you by Vape Daddies, now with 4 locations in the greater Boston area for all of your vaping needs and questions. Remember to subscribe to In the Weeds on clnsmedia.com. For Steve Helmuth, who directed this, thank you so much, Steve. For Dan McCarthy, who came in today on a snowy afternoon in April. What is going on with the world? There is no thing as climate change,
no,
though.
Not real.
That does not exist because it's scientific, right?
Sad.
For Dan McCarthy, I'm Jimmy Young. We'll hear you and see you next time on In the Weeds. In the Weeds is a podcast produced at the studios of Little Park Media in Wellesley, Massachusetts for the listening enjoyment of our audience. None of the opinions or advice on this program should be considered medical advice or a substitute for seeing a certified medical marijuana practitioner or your local physician. All opinions and thoughts on this show do not necessarily represent the management of CLNS Media Group or Little Park Media.